irrespective of your faith or religious philosophical perspective, realize that as a human being, every human being has intrinsic value and worth. Every human being is a treasured person. Realize that you are not an awful person. You are not broken. You are not awful. Some people really almost hate themselves.
You are now listening to the Highlight Reel Builder for Authors, the Going North podcast. I'm your host, certified self-leadership trainer and author of the best-selling book, Stay the Course, Dom Brightman. And you're going to be getting some goodies today from the guest that's up next. And today on the Highlight Reel Builder for Authors, known as the Going North podcast, are back at you again, but this time it's a host-to-host special because, my goodness, in the words of one of my favorite video game characters, Big Smoke from GTA San Andreas, it's time to return the favor because I was lucky enough and be able to grace this wonderful man's podcast last year, Beyond the Crucible. And my man is back here on the Going North podcast because he himself has joined the business of immortality, folks. Because today's guest in particular, Forbes has hailed this man for his company is offering compelling insights for anyone who would like to wake up to feel inspired by their work but doesn't. And to make it even better and not butter, he's a certified coach with the ICF, the International Coach Federation, and he's also an elder at his local church, the Bay Area Community Church, and he's also a wonderful wife and father because he has his lovely wife Gail and 3 wonderful children who are in the process of developing their own unique paths of living lives of significance. So let's give it up for the WF himself, the wonderful and fantastic Warwick Fairfax. How you doing today, Warwick?
I'm doing real well, and thanks so much for having me, Dom. And yeah, we had you on ours, and thank you for having me on yours. So yeah, it's going to be fun.
Oh yeah, that's right. That's right. It's going to be fun on all the honey buns indeed. That's right. Well, actually, now think about it, the honey buns are going to be hot because, my goodness, Crucible Leadership.
Yes, they'll be scolding hot.
That's right indeed. So, my goodness, man. So, finally got the book out, Crucible Leadership. Like, what decides you to finally just pull the trigger and become a metaphorical book boomer in this wonderful land of, well, it's not really post-COVID, but the wonderful COVID era that brought on the book boomers of folks just pushing out books in addition to some are pushing out babies?
Yeah, well, Don, that's a good question because for many years, the last thing I wanted to do is write a book because just kind of give the Cliff Notes version for listeners. You know, people talk about privilege and wealth and all that. Well, I grew up with about as much privilege and wealth as it's possible to have. I grew up in Sydney, Australia, 150-year-old family media business, had the equivalent of, New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, TV, magazines. Not only was there wealth, but there was also respect. We were respected in the community as serving the community and good citizens, if you will. That was the image. So for your average person, having money and respect and status, what more is there to life than that, at least for a lot of folks? You have everything then. So, my whole life I spent trying to prepare myself to one day go in the family media business. So did my undergrad at Oxford, worked on Wall Street, got my MBA at Harvard Business School. My dad died in early 87. I felt the company, as did my parents, wasn't being run well along the ideals of the founder, who was a person of great faith. I don't know that I call myself a person of great faith, certainly a person of faith as much as I can, faith in Jesus, so to speak. So launched a $2 billion plus takeover, $2.25 billion takeover. For a variety of reasons, that all went south pretty quickly. I know you're all about going north. Well, I was going south, so which is not what you want to do. Your podcast is not called Going South for a reason. Well, I went the wrong direction. So we had too much debt. Australia got into a big recession in late 1990. newspapers are cyclical, the company went under. So a long way of saying, why did I write the book? For years, it was like, there's no way I want to write about my most painful experience that was humiliating. Yes, I lost a lot of money, but money has never been that much of a driver for me, because when you grow up with a lot and you've seen how it can be devastating, careful what you wish for. But I just didn't want to relive it, But then kind of the pivot point for me was in 2008. I gave a talk at my church because the pastor asked me to give some sermon illustration. And people came up weeks and months after and said, Warwick, what you shared really helped us. And I'm thinking, there aren't any ex-media moguls in the congregation. How could my story help anybody? It's one thing if you're a cancer survivor or a survivor of abuse, or there's a lot of really terrible things in this world in which there way too many people suffer. Unfortunately, there's a lot of things you could talk about and people could say, yeah, I've been there. I know what you mean. I feel your pain. That's awful. This is not that story. So anyway, all that said is, if I could write a book about my story that gave people hope, that helped them realize that their worst day doesn't have to define them, that you can bounce back to live a life of significance, which is life on purpose dedicated to serving others, then it was worth it. So really, that was the pivot. Before 2008, it's like, no way, no how I'm ever going to write this book. I'm not here to justify myself, explain myself. Most of it was all my fault anyway. What's there to explain? I was an idiot, young, naive, idealistic. My fault. What else is there to say? But if it could help people, that's why I wrote the book. It's all about helping people. So yeah, there we go.
Man, that's what I'm talking about, indeed. Yeah, yeah. Like your story is very rare. It's it's a prime jewel indeed. It's hard to find because not many people can say they lost $2.25 billion in a takeover attempt.
No, what's kind of funny is I gave a talk in my church just a couple of weeks or so ago, just in the morning, as well as a deal in the evening in our chapel. Anyway, in the morning, we got 2 services. And so somebody came up to the pastor and said, hey, boy, it was really good. I lost 200 million. And somehow in the second service, in a moment of, I don't know quite what, the pastor said in front of the congregation, hey, somebody said they lost 200 million. I said, well, no, that's a start. As if, I don't know whether that was the Christian thing to do, but it's what came off the top of my head. It's a start, but relative to losing 2.25, that's just like rounding error, It was the funniest thing, but yeah, it's a big number, so hard to relate to. Yeah, it's one of those things, even in this country, it's like, that's tough to beat. There aren't too many people put up their hands and say, yeah, I got you beat. I lost 3 billion or something. It's just, so there you go. So it's a weird record to have, but if somebody can beat that, please be my guest. Let me know. Who wants to be number 1 in that category? But what are you going to
do? Well, I hope nobody wants to be number 1 in that category, especially with inflation now. It probably is $3 billion.
There you go. That's right. Thank you for reminding me. Yeah, it's probably a lot more. That was in like $1990. So yeah, 30 years. Yeah, you're probably right. It's probably worth a lot more now. So thank you.
Oh, dang. Wow.
It's all good.
Well, my goodness, indeed. So, with going through that loss and then really that crucible moment, like, well, to be honest, really moments, because it seems like it was one of those compounding effects in reverse where it worked to your disadvantage. Like, do you feel like that led to you being a man of faith today, or were you always a man of faith and this just really strengthened it?
Interesting question. So I came to faith, there was a legacy of faith, the founder of the company, my great-great-grandfather, John Fairfax. He elder his church, wonderful husband, father. His employees loved him. He treated them well. It wasn't like, let's rip people off. When he died, they said, we've lost a valued employer, a friend. Who says that about their boss back in the 1800s? There weren't a whole lot of laws stopping, I don't know what, work exploitation. It's the 1800s. It's a different era. But so I came to faith when I was at Oxford, an evangelical Anglican church. And so the faith has always been the driving point of my life. But when the company went under, that's when I really had to lean into my faith. Probably the worst part of the Crucible was the money has never been that important to me. And we weren't out on the street. We were fine. I mean, we weren't like poverty stricken or anything. But there was a loss of self-esteem, the feeling like I let my family down and all. But the worst thing is, in my youth and naivety, I felt like, well, God must have a plan to resurrect the company in the image of the founder, who, as I said, was a strong believer. And it wasn't about putting Jesus lives on the front page. It was more about how people will be treated, with respect and all that. But so I felt in some way that God had a plan and I blew it. And for a person of faith, that's about as soul crushing as you can get. Look at the good I could have done for Australia. I mean, for the company, but it was such a big part of Australia. I mean, you'd sort of feel like it could have a big impact. So I kind of had to really lean into my faith and just this notion in Philippians, it talks about count it all as rubbish compared as the passing, knowledge of knowing Christ Jesus. Then it later on talks about forgetting what is behind, straining toward what is ahead. So really, when you go through a soul-crushing crucible, if you're a person of faith, you can either abandon it, how could a loving God, allow this? And in my case, it was more my fault. So it wasn't like, oh, how did he allow it? Hey, it was me. Other people maybe have a harder time. But I just lean into it and say, well, if God had wanted it to happen, even with my youth and naivety, he would have. So clearly in his sovereign will, he has a better plan for my life. And so I just leaned in hard. It's almost like a man with a ship in the raging storm. I just dug my fingernails into the mast and held on even tighter. And so I think you go through something like that, it either draws you closer to your faith or further apart. There's no stay the same. That's just not possible in a crucible. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of that was my path. And yeah, I just dug in, and over time I began to see, maybe it was a blessing in the sense I get to lead my own life. I don't have to follow in my ancestors, which is, I sometimes say, is a bit like being in the British or the, royal family. It's like Prince William saying, hey, I want to check out, well, Harry has kind of done that, and look what's happened to him. It's not easy, for Harry and Meghan. It's pretty tough. So, checking out of the royal family is not something you do lightly. There are consequences. So I really lent into my faith. It was either that or drift away. And I chose to lean in further.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about, indeed. And it's great that it happened that way, because sometimes folks may be like, oh, man, some folks want to go in reverse and really blame God for their failures when, hey, at the same time, yes, God is in control, and sometimes control can be an illusion, but at the same time, we have stuff to own up to our own decisions that we make.
Well, exactly. I mean, God is a forgiving God, but there are consequences for our actions, and obviously there's atonement and all that goes with it. But yeah, I mean, I just came to realize that God had a better plan. I get to do what I enjoy, which is, to write and talk, be a reflective advisor. I've been an elder at my church and was on my kids' school board, which is a Christian school. So, I would have been trapped in this sort of gilded prison in some sense. I mean, a wealthy prison, but a prison nonetheless. It's funny. A lot of people without money think, wouldn't it be great to be rich? There's not a whole lot of rich people that are happy. It doesn't mean poverty is good either. I mean, but the middle is fine, roof over your head, food. It's pretty tough to be happy when you're starving and you've got nowhere to, hang your head. I mean, that's not my background, but conceptually, I get the concept. But there's people with a lot of money, like the more you have, it's like the money owns you. It owns your soul, and you're fearful of losing things. You compare yourself to the next guy or next person, right? It's like, gosh, I have like a little jet, but that guy has a really big jet. He has a bigger car, a bigger boat, I got a place in the Hamptons or, I don't know, Rehoboth, wherever. But gosh, that other guy, he's got a place in the south of France. Gee, I know it sounds pathetic, but honestly, rich people think that way. There's always another level, right? It's like in sports, you may be the greatest basketball player or baseball player in high school, and then, but there's always somebody better. Man, I guess I'm not that good. Gosh, you know? So another lesson I've learned is having your self-esteem all wrapped up in what you do and money. It's never a way to happiness. It's pretty much a guaranteed way to misery. So another,
Mm.
money's not evil, money's not wrong. Make sure you own money, don't let money own you. That's the big difference, you know? Who's in control? You or the money?
Oh yeah, that's right. Cause money as a ruler, it's not a good one. It's not good at
No,
all.
indeed.
Man, oh man, but that's so powerful indeed. Cause that's the thing. It's like, oh yeah, like folks want to try to be mad, and the folks who have money saying, "Man, you got the life great." Like, why y'all, especially like during recessions when some folks
Hmm.
commit suicide when they have all this access to wealth and all these connections. And it's like, why are you committing suicide with all that money? Like, I know what to do with it. Go and buy a big old TV and pay off some debt. Like, why you feel so
Right.
sad and not realizing that really the money is just an amplifier of certain things where they don't have that true self-esteem and they don't have that true sense of self-worth, and they really just let that money amplify that. And it's just so good
Yeah.
that you're able to learn that. Well, just really be on both sides of that. So how was it really on the opposite side, like really owing all that money? Heck, even finding your way all the way to Maryland, no less. I guess as a result, I guess you had to leave the country too for from all of that as
Yeah. I
well.
mean, fortunately, my wife's American, who I met in Australia, and company went under, so it wasn't like the company went bankrupt, not me personally, fortunately, but yeah, so it wasn't like I owed a bunch of money, but yeah, I mean, it was rough in the 90s just for the self-esteem and all. I had a young family that helped, but I think one of the things you realize is, you want to be, and it's easier said than done. I do realize you want to try and be content in whatever situation you're in, and some situations are harder than others. I get that, but having your esteem, and from my perspective, in that God loves every human unconditionally just because of who we are. He made us all uniquely in his image. He doesn't make mistakes, so he makes you a certain way with certain giftings, background, and just realize he loves you unconditionally, and just be thankful for family, for friends, good friends, those who care about you. Not, you don't want to have friends who say, we always knew you wouldn't make it, or you're a loser. And if those are your friends, find some other ones, find some ones that care about you and uplift you rather than pull you down. But if you have family and some good friends, and you're doing work that helps other people, I mean, that's one of the things I've realized is the way to be happy is, yes, from my perspective, put your faith in God. But if you live what we call a life of significance, a life on purpose, dedicated to serving others, if you're trying to make others happy, give other people drops of grace in whatever form that is, whether it's church, nonprofit, just in the work you do, how you treat the people around you, whatever that means to you, that's the way of happiness. Being some narcissistic, it's all about me, let's get rich, that way lies misery. You may not like the way you're made, or you might disagree with God's design, but the only way we get to be happy is when we think of serving others. That is the only way. So you want to be happy, serve others, care about others, think about people other than yourself. It's that simple, really. You may not like it. It's the way we're designed. Complain to the guy that designed us. Why can't I be happy with lots of money? Why can't I be happy being a narcissistic, you know, awful person? Sorry, you can't.
Yeah, it's so true. It just really just listening to wonderful folks like you've been in that echelon of wealth before, especially with the company and everything, and just realizing, hey, and just learning more from that on the other side, looking in, and vice versa. It's really, really illuminating, and it's good that you mentioned service too, because that's really like some of my best days ever is when I've helped somebody else, especially those who really can't pay me back for anything, because you never know if folks are going through, especially nowadays where it seems like there's been an amplifier put on a lot of people's issues and problems. And like even more problems that are folks are still very new to. So with all of the stuff that you've been through, like what has helped you to really, I guess, in addition to faith, like stay focused on keeping, like, in a way, rebuilding yourself and staying focused on your goals?
You know, for me, I look at it like taking steps of faith. In life, I mean, I'm a strategic planner by nature. We would all love to have the 5, 10, 20-year plan for our life, marriages, kids, business, metrics. That may work in a business, doesn't tend to work in life because there's this annoying thing called faith. It's almost like imagine you're walking along a beach. Maybe it's a foggy morning. Maybe you can see 100 foot in front of you. You're not going to see 100 yards or 500 yards. So what I've tried to do is, again, from my perspective, I lean into my faith. Like if you're a person of faith, you should read your Bible pretty regularly. That's the manual. I mean, if you believe, and I'm in my book, I say everybody has the God-given right to believe in whatever they believe in, whether it's Christianity, like another major religion, like Islam, Buddhism, Hinduism, another philosophy. Everybody has the God-given right to choose their path. And as an executive coach, I believe that very strongly. But whatever path you choose, lean into that. And then when you feel like God or whoever it is just giving you that nudge, it says, you know what, Dom, you know what, Warwick, you need to do this. When when it's something, call it your inner truth, call it God, call it your soul, whatever you want to call it. It's those steps of obedience that leads to ultimately a fulfilling life, a life of significance, a life that you can be proud of, those that love you can be proud of, and a life of joy and fulfillment. So it's really, Lord, what is it you want me to do? Who do you want me to speak to? Who do you want me to help? What do you feel like is the next step today? And then just when you hear, obey, and then you'll get the next message. It's like going down a city streets. Okay, turn left. Okay, great. What do I do after I turn left? I'm not going to tell you. After you turn left, I'll let you know. Turn left first. It's not a normal GPS when you can zoom out and see the whole. No, God's GPS doesn't work that way. He just tells you the next turn. It's annoying, but what are you going to do? So it's really, it's those steps of faith as being steps, being true to your inner soul, that helps guide you on the path to accomplishing, I could say your goals, but for a person of faith, maybe his goals, God's goals. So not everybody might look at it the same way that I do, or maybe you do, but whether you call it God or some inner soul, your inner soul or the universe, the vast majority of people, certainly young people today, are spiritual. Not too many hardcore atheists. They may not believe in, Jesus, Son of God, all that kind of deal, but they do believe in spirituality. So have you defined spirituality? Listen to it. Listen to that still small voice, that inner soul, and just be obedient.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. And I just love the visual you painted, the picture you painted with God's GPS, because it's like I've heard of God's GPS multiple times, an example in sermons, but the thing is, you're so right. Like, you only know what the next move is. Sometimes you may even not know what the next move is. Sometimes it just says go. And you figure out as you go along, and then you get that hindsight, and it becomes 2020 as opposed to regular GPS. You get to see like the start and stop points, and you get to plot your way and plan some shortcuts if you want to. Like God's GPS, a totally different story. Like you could have never foreseen the losing your company, like they never could have foreseen yourself moving all the way to the US of A from Australia. You could have never probably even seen yourself write a book and publish it.
No, absolutely. And, as you're talking, Dom, I think one of the things that gives us encouragement is as you look backwards on the steps of faith, as you connect the dots, it's almost like, I think this is true when Moses, was leading his people out of Egypt to the promised land. He would build like little altars, little, memorial stones of where they were and God's faithfulness in the journey. I mean, it took like 40 years. It wasn't a particularly fun journey. People got a bit sick of eating manna, this wafer bread thing was day after day for decades. I could get how you could get sick of that, but I think it's very helpful to look backwards and say, gosh, I feel blessed. And, maybe, the family I had, I know just because you're on our podcast, just you talked about your dad and, just the blessing he was in your life. And I know because we've talked, I know you do, I'm sure, reflect on that often. So you just reflect on those little memorial stones in your life and say, you know what, I'm grateful. Another key to the fulfilling life is gratitude, you know, rather than saying, what do I want to whine today about? Or as we say in Australia, whinge. Whinging is like whining multiplied by 10. Never want to whinge. But, look back and say, I'm so thankful, whether it's to God or the universe. I'm grateful for this and grateful for that. It's hard to be depressed if you're thinking of gratitude. Gratitude, pushes away bad thoughts, at least often it does.
You can see that again, especially as you go down the list one by one. It's like, oh wow, this is a lot. This is a lot indeed. And then speaking of a lot, you have a podcast of your own that actually came before the book Beyond the Cursible. Indeed, and you've been interviewing all these wonderful folks across the globe, especially those who've been sharing stories of resilience, man. So how does it feel with that podcast? I believe 2 years in now with that, right?
Yeah. Dom, it's been such a blessing because what's remarkable is we've had people from every kind of crucible, whether it's a Navy SEAL being paralyzed in a training accident to victims of abuse, people have lost businesses, people have lost loved ones. We've had every gender, every race, people from all over the world, about as diverse a group of people and experiences as you could imagine. But what's remarkable is the path back amidst the diversity is almost identical. So how can you have identical paths back amidst such diversity of experience and background? Because, they've all chosen to have hope rather than hide under the covers after the unspeakable has been done to them or unspeakable tragedy. They've said it was awful, it wasn't right, or what I did wasn't right, or was a mistake. But they choose to not hide under the covers for the next 30, 40, 50 years until life melts away. They choose to say, okay, I'm going to bounce back. I'm going to learn from my mistakes, or I'm going to learn from it. And I'm going to use what I went through to help others. And the way back is always the same. I mean, I learn a lot from people on the podcast. We had an Australian woman the other day who became a quadriplegic at age 12 through a diving accident, just one of those above ground pools you have in your backyard. And you know how parents say, hey, her name is Stacy. Hey, Stacy, don't jump in that pool. Well, kids at 12, what are they going to do? They ignore their parents, but it's fun. I'm here with my friends, my buddies, let's go. And so she knew it was her fault. Who else was she going to blame? But she's 12. I mean, but she's an outgoing person with joy. And she says, what I went through was a gift. And how could becoming a quadriplegic be a gift? I can't fathom. I have no way of explaining it, but I've heard other people use words like gift, blessing. They've found, I know it's an old aphorism, purpose in the pain. Somehow they're being able to, as psychologists say, reframe it and being able to see some good that come out of it. So I would never say going through tragedy is a gift or a blessing. I mean, I would not say that in general, although for me and I'm almost getting to the point where I can say what I went through was a gift and a blessing in some fashion. Now, I'm not going to speak for anybody else. That's not up to me. But when you hear stories like that, it makes you think. I mean, how could being paralyzed, I think quadriplegic at age 12, how in the world could that be a gift? But I don't know, somehow she felt like it's taught us some stuff she never would have learned otherwise. So it's really crazy, to be honest, but I love learning from people, and just, we can learn a lot from people who've gone through tragedy and bounced back. Every interview I have, every story I hear, I feel like, gosh, I'm learning. And yeah, I just love sharing people's stories too, obviously, because nobody would have heard of her in America. And it's just fun to share those sorts of stories. So yeah, it's all good.
Oh yeah, definitely say that again, indeed, and such an honorable stance to take of just saying that, hey, tragedy is starting to be a gift for me from my life, but I can't speak for everybody else because it's so darn true. Because everybody has a certain level of threshold of pain that they can go through and go to, as opposed to a lot of other people. Some may have a lot less today, as some would say,
Yeah, I
compared to
mean, even
before.
if you can't say it's a gift or a blessing, and I'm not here to tell anybody to say that about any tragedy, but if you can find some purpose in it, make some meaning out of it, again, I'm not a psychologist, but psychologists will tell you if you can find some meaning and purpose out of it, it does help you move on. There is a healing component of finding meaning and purpose, and a healing component of using what you've been through to help others. Cancer survivors often will help other cancer survivors. Those who've been abused will often help others who've been abused. It doesn't make the whole pain go away, but from what I hear from others, it does make it a bit easier to live with, and there is a healing component in it. So, that's something to think about. Even if you're not an altruistic person, you want to lessen the pain, think of others. It does help a bit.
You can say that again. You can say that again. Indeed. That's right. Always think about others, y'all. That's right. Always think about others, indeed. Because folks always need help, indeed. So, this is far from your first rodeo on the guest side of the game on these podcasts. So, is there a question that you wish you be asked more often when you're on the guest side of these wonderful interviews?
Boy, that is an interesting question. I think one of the things that's, I think, so important to me is just this sense of identity. And we've touched on this, but really, sort of like the country song, seeking self-esteem in all the wrong places kind of thing. you know, of course, it's said not quite like that in country songs, but you get the idea, you know, maybe it's seeking love in all the wrong places, whatever it is. But yeah, I think one key to joy and fulfillment is don't see your identity in how much money you have, what kind of job you have, where you went to school. I mean, look, I did my undergrad at Oxford and got my MBA at Harvard Business School. Those are two of the finest institutions on the planet. But it doesn't make me any happier than anybody that didn't go there. It doesn't make me any better than any other human being on the planet. So have an accurate appraisal of yourself, but seek your identity for a person of faith in God's unconditional love for you, or in spirituality, universe, whatever it is, maybe the love of some close friends. But the whole identity is probably one of the most crucial things in life. Because time and time again, you hear people say, yep, sought my identity in my job and I was fired. And then, it's not easy being fired. I get that. But, really one of the key things in life is, where is your identity? Put your identity in something that will last, like the Fort Knox, if you will, of identity, which is in the eternal, God or the universe, whatever you call it. So that to me that's probably one of the key struggles, is where is your identity? You get the identity thing solved, you have a much greater chance of having joy and fulfillment, or at least being able to weather predictable storms that take away your identity in things that are external.
Powerful right there, and a good point indeed. And funny enough, that probably should be covered a lot more on this podcast. The fact that just really knowing your identity, because there are so many people walking around on Earth not knowing who they are, and those who may have gotten to a certain point in life thinking they knew who they were isn't really who they truly are. So I believe you yourself, you identify in Christ Jesus yourself, and
Mhm.
that has really been a journey you've been on for decades now. So, any advice out there for those who may, because I know not everybody's a Christian listening, even though it'd be
Sure,
ideal, but it's not.
sure.
It's obviously not the thing. What has helped you to really find your identity in Christ, that may be helping somebody's going through that right now, where they feel a little lost, need to get back on track to finding who they truly are?
I think, irrespective of your faith or religious philosophical perspective, realize that as a human being, every human being has intrinsic value and worth. Every human being is a treasured person. Realize that you are not an awful person. You are not broken. You are not awful. Some people really almost hate themselves, for a variety of often understandable but terrible reasons. So really think of yourself as a valued person, and therefore be authentic. Don't put on the masks. Don't pretend to be who you're not. Just be you. Because you might find people like the real you, and they don't mind it because we're all different. We're all some are introverts, extrovert, artistic, math. We're all very, very different. But be content with who you are. Be authentic, and that would be maybe a more general way of putting it. Don't try and pretend. Just feel like, from the Bible says, we're beautifully and wonderfully made. Even if you don't believe in God or the Bible, just how about thinking about life that way? I am beautifully and wonderfully made. Just how about that being your mantra, no matter what you believe in? I think we should all in theory be able to agree on that, right?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yes, indeed. Especially the value piece, because I kind of have a love-hate relationship with that word value, because I feel like a lot of folks in the entrepreneurial space be like, hey, I want to add value to you. And of course, folks have to realize, hey, everyone's valuable already. They just have to unleash it, unlock it, and figure out how they can
Exactly.
use that value to help other people.
Exactly. Yeah. You start off being very valuable. And from my perspective, he loves us, God loves us no matter what, even when we make mistakes. Yeah, it's like a good parent. A good parent never disowns their kids, right? They love their kids just because, even when they make mistakes. Well, I think, our eternal Father has the same perspective. So, whatever your faith perspective is, I think it's a better way, rather than thinking of some eternal being that just hates us and want to inflict us with pain. Maybe that's right. I don't think it is, but why not be optimistic? Why not assume that there's some loving supreme being out there and just make that assumption that we are valuable and valued just because of who we are?
Sweet. That's what I'm talking about indeed. Well, we're coming down to the magical question that every guest gets to receive, and that is if you're to wake up tomorrow and you're 25 again, but this time you're in the current year of 2021 with all of your amassed knowledge and experience, what advice would you give to yourself?
Don't do it. Don't do the takeover. It is not worth it. It would be, don't do it. Get out. Get out now. Leave. Unfortunately, I wouldn't have listened because it would have been, maybe more like the Prince William than Harry, which is not necessarily better or worse, but the duty on a country kind of deal. I couldn't have gotten out. It would have been too difficult. But it felt like I disowned my dad and family. But yeah, I mean, I would have tried to convince myself, don't do the takeover, leave, just chart your own course. In the long run, I would have been better off, but there aren't do-overs in life, and the chances of me listening is close to zero. Sometimes you got to go through pain to learn. Sometimes there aren't any shortcuts, unfortunately. So, it's a great question. You'd like to think your younger self would listen, but who knows?
Oh, yeah. It's like, don't do it. It's a trap. Like, what trap? And who the heck are you? Like, don't worry
Exactly.
about it.
Exactly.
It's like, don't
Exactly.
worry.
Yeah, what do you know? Why should I believe you? Come on.
Oh, man. But for those who want to keep in contact with the legendary Warwick himself and buy some copies of this magical book and share it with their friends and family, heck, maybe even a camel, what's the best way for folks to do so?
Well, thanks. You can go to my website, crucibleleadership.com. My book is available wherever good books are sold, Amazon, Barnes and Nobles, kind of everywhere. You can also listen to my podcast, Beyond the Crucible, that's available, Apple, Spotify, everywhere. And then I'm on LinkedIn at Warwick Fairfax and on Facebook at Crucible Leadership. So those are all some ways that people can follow me.
That's what I'm talking about indeed. So y'all better follow this man and all the stuff that he's doing because my goodness, my man's got a powder keg of content that will inspire you to be the best you that you can be indeed. Y'all better check out that podcast. I'm not saying it just because I was on it. I'm saying it because of all the other freaking fabulous people that are on it as well. And check out this wonderful book indeed. Yours truly's got the ebook and is in the waits for the hardback cover indeed. This record is going to be freaking amazing. So definitely check it out, like 77 library books indeed. So any parting words before we close up shop?
Yeah, I mean, basically, if today is your worst day, you're at the bottom of the pit, your worst day doesn't have to define you. There is hope. There is a journey back, and that journey is a life of service, which we call a life of significance, a life on purpose dedicated to serving others. So even if today is your worst day, and it's going to be hard for it to believe, there is hope.
You just got done listening to another powerful, power-packed episode of the Going North podcast. I hope you really enjoyed what you heard. Go check out the guest stuff. It's all in the show notes on the website, donbrightman.com, and also reach out to those that you've just heard as well. And keep going north.